Your Excellency, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants in this symposium. I would like to begin my talk with some reflections on the experiences of young people today. It seems to me that the experience of young people is closely related to the social and ecclesial roles of families. In fact, the young generations exist in today's families and offer a color photograph of the realities at work in them. Can we, the mature generations, who experience firsthand the sufferings, the contradictions and uncertainties of a system that, considered as a whole, did not even exist when we older people were their age, can we really understand what the young generations are going through? It seems strange, but our youth was so different from theirs. Their frailties are not only ours, they are more and different. Some even say that the protagonists, the prospects, are sadder than ours, since we grew up in our maturity in the 80s and 90s of the last century, in the hedonism that was spoken of and in a more or less easily intelligible, less complicated world. The interior and exterior world is only partly understandable, starting from our experience. And this makes it extremely difficult to try to reflect on the fact that young people, the last to arrive on the stage of life, struggle to find a place in the world, to orient themselves in it. Deprived of faith by the very world around them, they seem to be lost. They carry the weight, after all, of our legacy. We are induced to propose to them our experiences, the models we had, right or wrong as they were. But these were models for that world, ours, and no longer for theirs, precisely because everything has changed very quickly and has led us down paths that very few could have foreseen. And now both we and they find ourselves at an impasse. No one knows exactly which way to go. This casts a shadow, a sort of mortgage, on every investigation, forecast, and program. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 remains a watershed that we can hardly ignore. Many processes began with it. With it came the collapse of ideologies. The political parties themselves changed their names, at least in many countries. And so institutions that were aggregating by nature ended up losing the glue that held them together, giving a more or less certain meaning to their action, but also attracted new blood and pushed them to continue the work of their predecessors. Fathers had children, and children continued their work. This continuity of life is extremely important to create identity, cohesion, trust, and instead we have, generally speaking, become opaque in our contemporary world, at least in the West. Added to this is the collapse of religious practice and the real void or leap in the transmission of faith, which moreover predates 1989. It's no mystery that for the vast majority of young people in the West, churches are non-places, which they enter as if they were entering a pub, having lost all awareness of the meaning of sacredness. They are strange places where one does not know exactly what to do. It is true and it's very significant that in general there is not even hostility. Even so-called scientific atheism and flag-waving anti-clericalism are strong narratives which could have belonged to previous generations, but few today would be capable of them. We have created a world that is not atheist, but descriptively speaking, without God, as in fact he does not generally live in literature, in cinema, in newspapers, on television, in songs, or on social media. representations of the world that reflect precisely the life of each one of us. That is how we perceive ourselves and orient our existence. Indifference. With all this, we cannot forget that there exist, even among young people, numerous stories of authentic recovery of faith, and any priest who knows how to listen to them could tell very comforting episodes. But furthermore, we cannot fail to remember the trauma, the extent of which has not yet been fully measured, of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. Remote lessons were necessary to guarantee health protection, and in fact, they were a necessary minimum. But the isolation from one from the other for a prolonged time and determined by fear settled in the minds of children like the memory of a war. And the return to normality did not necessarily mean for everyone to leave this perspective. They were not classes, except virtual, but virtual is not real. They were faces on the screen, and there they appeared together, but in reality, each was alone. And the unification on the video was fallacious. Whether they followed the lessons or not, whether they answered the exams with prompts or not, it's difficult to say. And everyone simply thought that it could not be done otherwise. It may be that in this state of affairs, is being reabsorbed, but in the meantime, the wounds are still visible and are added to the fragility typical of their age and to the hostility and harshness of life that adults have left them. There is certainly a widespread problem of psychological fragility, which the pandemic has exacerbated, especially in young people and the very young. In a world of isolated people, the weakest are crushed. Bullying has always existed, but today it takes on dramatic connotations. The natural desire to expand one's personality pushes one to grow, to develop one's potential. Schools in general and universities in particular rightly promote it through merit. However, aggressive and unhealthy competitiveness does not help but kills. In this sense, the dizzying increase of suicides among students in many countries, even in high schools, is very worrisome. The influencer's easy success model prevents us from living the inevitable failures that life reserves for everyone. And in a context like ours of exacerbated individualism that blocks the capacity for resilience. Our eyes no longer see reality, but an image of it. The enchantment of cinema first, and then of television, even more easily circumscribed there, has been replicated. And this is the epochal difference that has been produced, splitting the world into a reality on the one hand, and into an image, a fantasy, on the other. Thus, our life has been projected into that fantasy itself, making us live an existence that is not real, but enchanted in bright colors, a fairy tale that we are willing to believe in. Through the screens of our cell phones, we are continuously connected to a gallery of images of the world that are not the world, but ghosts. Persuasive and appealing, a sort of advertising, not of products, but of life as a product or consumer good that makes us enter this double world. We no longer say, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, but rather paraphrasing the French philosopher René Descartes, we say, breviloquor ergo sum, I post, therefore I am. And so in this world of solitary and isolated individuals, it's necessary to turn off thought in order to survive. To turn on your cell phone and connect to not feel the void. Because behind this screen, everyone is protected from an indifferent or hostile world. Likes comfort us, there is no enemy, and everyone can say what they want, protected from the consequences. In this regard, the words of the Italian psychoanalyst Luigi Zoya seem very pertinent, and I quote, "After the death of God, the death of the neighbor is the disappearance of the second fundamental relationship of man. Man falls into a fundamental solitude. He is an orphan without precedent in history." So to all of this, one could add the precariousness of work, which forces many to be unable to think about their future, the brain drain, which dissipates our best forces, the very prospects of a piecemeal Third World War, which threatens to become even larger, frame a landscape that seems truly desolate. And we must admit that the world has been deconstructed by individualism, typical of the entire Western culture, and now brought to truly radical consequences in the virtual world in which we live. From the historical structures of our society, with political and social institutions increasingly less believed, the questioning of the family and stable relationships. Yet in the Catholic Christian vision, it is precisely family and stable relationships that offer the best way to emerge from the maze of this narcissistic and deconstructed world. The family, in all its social and ecclesial implications, is an experience of order in the chaos of the world and offers the locus for authentic and full realization for all generations, including ours. The family is an institution of capital importance for our personal and social life. With a good family behind us, we can conquer the world, because although the family is the smallest institution in the world, it is also the largest. It is much smaller than a village, a city, a region, or a state, but it is also larger than all these entities because it comes before all of them. Before there were villages, there were families. Before the great empires arose, tiny families had already prospered for generations. Without the family, there would certainly never have been villages, towns, cities, or nations. The family is one of God's most wonderful gifts. It is the institution that shapes our character like no other. It exists simply pro Deo et Patria, for God and for country. Therefore, it's not surprising that Pope Francis dedicated his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, to the theme of the family. And I quote from it, he said, "The Bible is full of families, births, love stories, and family crises. This is true from the very first page with the appearance of Adam and Eve's family, with all its burden of violence, but also its enduring strength at the very last page, where we behold the wedding feast of the bride and the Lamb." So for better or for worse, for rich or for poor, in sickness and in health, each of us carries his or her family within us for all the days of our lives. Our family is not with us as a mere memory, but has a decisive influence on the way we act and behave. Our very bodies are shaped by our parents. We speak like them. We resemble them. Unconsciously, we imitate their gestures or walk with a similar gait. The influence of our parents is even more deeply imprinted on our psyches. We inherit many values, explicit and implicit, from our families. The goals we pursue owe much to our family's ambitions and to our reaction to their aspirations. The family is a web from which we can never extricate ourselves and from which we never really want to detach ourselves. But today, there is no agreement on whether the family should play a central role in society. Although the family structure continues to exist, in some cases it is truly difficult to recognize in it what had been in the previous generation. We see new relational configurations of same-sex couples welcoming children with the help of surrogate mothers or sperm donor fathers. Although they push some important moral boundaries, these alternative families are so modeled on the traditional family that paradoxically they attest to our nostalgia for the traditional family model. There is tolerance for unusual and avant-garde relational configurations in the West, but the traditional family is no longer fashionable. Even the expression family values for some symbolizes blind and thoughtless adherence to a crude and outdated morality. In this context, the question arises, is it still possible to live as Christian families in today's world? The task is certainly more difficult and challenging than it has been so far. Previously, Western societies identified to a certain extent with Christian values, but many Christians lived in an environment that supported family unity. Their commitment could survive without being deeply rooted. But since the cultural climate around us is so unstable, our roots must sink deeper into the soil of our faith if we are to weather the storm. In our society, the beauty and greatness of married love and the family has been so obscured that most people now view marriage and family as a prison, a conventional, boring, legal matter that threatens love and destroys freedom. Love is heaven, marriage is hell, opined Lord Byron 150 years ago. And at that time, he could not have foreseen the incredible popularity that his idea would have today. But the phenomenologist and Catholic philosopher Dietrich von Hildebrand reacted to this attitude of anti-personalism, which manifests itself in the deconstructed world reflected upon above. And long before he converted to Catholicism, von Hildebrand was convinced that the community of love in marriage is one of the deepest sources of happiness. He saw the grandeur and the beauty of the union of spouses in marriage, symbolized by their physical union, which leads in such a mysterious way to the creation of a new person. He recognized that love, by its very essence, longs for infinity, for eternity. Therefore, a person truly in love wants to bind himself forever to his or her beloved, which is precisely the gift that marriage gives. In contrast, love without an unqualified commitment betrays the very essence of love. The one who refuses to commit himself or herself, or who breaks a commitment in order to start another relationship, fools himself. He confuses the excitement of novelty with authentic happiness. And once we understand and accept the truth of such an approach, we are well on the way to offering a cogent and powerful answer and witness to the young generations, helping them to emerge from the loneliness they experience and helping them to rediscover and reconstruct true personalism, the authentic, the only authentic relations, and the only way forward for men and women of all times and all cultures. So this personalist view of marriage and the family, encouraged by then Apostolic Nuncio to Germany, Eugenio Pacelli, later Pius XII, greatly influenced Catholic theology of marriage and the family in the years after the war, during the Second Vatican Council, through the theology of the body of St. John Paul II, the pastoral concern and esteem for marriage and for family of Pope Benedict XVI, and the constant call of Pope Francis to rediscover the value of family life. The first two ingredients of a Christian family are a man and a woman, as we heard from the deputy speaker. A man and a woman who are committed to forming a fundamental unity of themselves, while not compromising their two unique and distinctive personalities. The book of Genesis tells us that the man will abandon his father and mother and unite with his wife, and the two will be one flesh. From the book of Genesis, we also know that an amazing unity did not last long. Adam and Eve rebelled against God, and when they did, the harmony between them was also broken. For many people, the idea of becoming one for a lifetime is completely unrealistic. Even when Jesus spoke of marriage lasting forever, his disciples considered it virtually impossible to accept, and they thought it more appropriate not to marry at all. Marriages fail, as do the vocations of priests. Yet a husband and a wife who are humanly mature can guarantee themselves a happy union if they invite God into their lives. For this reason, at the beginning of the 4th chapter of Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis offers a beautiful and profound exegesis of one of the most well-known passages on love in the entire Bible, St. Paul's famous hymn to charity. To describe patient love, he refers to the one who does not act on impulse and avoids giving offense. He says, patience takes root when I recognize that other people also have a right to live in this world, just as they are. It does not matter if they hold me back, if they unsettle my plans or annoy me by the way they act or think, or if they are not everything. I want them to be. Love always has an aspect of deep compassion that leads to accepting the other person as part of this world, even when he or she acts differently than I would like. And if this does not express in elegant synthesis why the institution of Christian marriage, and by extension the family, is the only antidote to the world that has been deconstructed by individualism, then I don't know what does. In commenting on the bearing of all things of love, Pope Francis also writes, married couples joined by love speak well of each other. They try to show their spouse's good side, not their weaknesses and faults. In any event, they keep silent rather than speak ill of them. This is not merely a way of acting in front of others. It springs from an interior attitude. Far from ingenuously claiming not to see the problems and weaknesses of others, it sees those weaknesses and faults in a wider context. It recognizes that failings are part of the bigger picture. We have to realize that all of us are a complex mixture of light and shadows. The other person is much more than the sum of the little things that annoy me. Note the personalism of Dietrich von Hildebrand that lies behind the comments of Pope Francis, as well as the way the Pope presents Christian marriage and by extension the family as the only antidote to the world deconstructed by individualism. So traditionally in Western culture, and still in many other cultures today, the basic Elements of a family have been marriage between man and a woman in a nuclear family with children. There is no doubt that many marital relationships have been less than ideal and that the traditional framework has had shortcomings. Women were not afforded equal treatment. Fathers wielded excessive power. Many children were forced to work from a young age, resulting in neglect of childhood. But whatever disadvantages the traditional family structure had, it has helped countless generations. Society was geared towards supporting the family. Society expected marriages to work, wanted couples to stay together and have children. It tolerated separation, or in extreme cases, divorce, as last-ditch solutions. In Western societies and some others, the traditional model has been shattered. There's no longer any expectation of monogamy, lifelong commitment, or children. When push comes to shove, divorce is seen by many as a reasonable choice. What future is there for the family? Will it regain its former position as the fundamental unit of Western culture, or will it morph into multiple forms? Will marriage and family provide a stable structure for embarking on the journey of life, or merely a temporary resting place? What happens to a social fabric in which individuals make a lasting promise to marry only to easily break it if things don't go as they planned? In other words, will we choose to live in the darkness, loneliness, and solipsism of individualism, or will we choose to live in the light, friendship, and communion of personalism? The moral questions continue. Will children be reduced to pawns in the bitter struggle between their divorced parents? How can children be helped to cope with the feelings of being alone and unwanted that can strike them when their parents divorce, or when unresolved anger over parents' conduct lingers with them for a long time to come? What can be done to support single parents, the vast majority of whom are mothers, as they try to raise their children alone? In the case of sperm donors and surrogate mothers, who is the real mother or father? Are the identity of the donor eggs or sperm really irrelevant? Is it fair to the children that their genetic mother or father remains anonymous? What does it mean for a child to learn that his or her father or mother will be forever untraceable? Or to learn that he or she is a designer child, paid for in the belief that a particular kind of child would emerge? What about the unborn children whose lives were cut short far too soon before they could become a visible part of their families? Are we the poorer for them not having seen the light of day? And we've not even begun to speak about today's gender ideology, described by Pope Francis as the ugly ideology of our time, which erases differences and makes everything the same. Pope Francis said to erase differences is to erase humanity. Once again, the choice: deconstructed individualism or reconstructed personalism. In its magisterium, the Catholic Church has been and remains remarkably consistent in its teaching on the family. The human person is not only sacred, but also social. How we organize our society in economics and politics and law and social policy directly affects human dignity and the capacity of individuals to grow in community. Marriage and family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened, not undermined. We believe people have a right and a duty to participate in society seeking together the common good and well-being of all, especially the poor and the vulnerable. In the words of Pope Francis, I quote, "Human beings are so made that they cannot live, develop, and find fulfillment except in the sincere gift of self to others. Nor can they fully know themselves apart from an encounter with other persons. I communicate effectively with myself only insofar as I communicate with others. No one can experience the true beauty of life without relating to others, without having real faces to love. This is part of the mystery of authentic human existence. Life exists where there is bonding, communion, fraternity, and life is stronger than death when it is built on true relationships and bonds of fidelity. On the contrary, there is no life when we claim to be self-sufficient and live as islands. In these attitudes, death prevails. And so family has a decisive influence on our personality and on our destiny. We are always born within a human context. The family environment can be poor, comfortable, or wealthy. Parents can be educated or illiterate, emotionally mature or immature. And all of these factors influence our existential perspectives. We do not all start from the same starting point. It would be nice if we were all equal, but given the way the cards are dealt, some are more equal than others. But our character, our personality develops throughout life. And this process begins in the family. It is there that children first learn to love and hate, to be kind or to be manipulative, to serve or to dominate. The family is the fundamental school for life. If children only learn injustice in the family, it will be very difficult for them to build a just culture as adults. If they are taught to lie and deceive, later they will have enormous difficulty in helping to build a transparent society. On an ecclesial level, perhaps we have not yet fully understood and realized the full import of St. John Paul II's insight into the family as the domestic church. Some etymology may help here. In Greek, the word ekklesia, commonly translated as church, is a compound of two segments. Ek, a preposition meaning out of, and a verb kaleo, signifying to call. Hence, to call out. The church, or ecclesia, is the one family community where all loneliness and individualism is superseded, where differences are accepted and integrated. The community of belonging where we are called out of our deconstructed, solitary, and impersonalist world to live in a reconstructed, communal, and personalist world, where we can be whom we truly are and can develop into whom we are truly called to be. Persons in relations with others, because we are persons in relation with God. And so, despite all the controversy over the role of the family in Western culture, there is something deeply reassuring in the fact that many people still believe in its value. Your presence here is witness to that. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, promulgated by the United Nations in 1948, proclaimed that the family is the fundamental unit of society. This is not a statement that things are so, but a statement of how things should be. It is not a description of the state of the family, but a formulation of an ideal for the family. It's not an empirical fact, but a value. And even when the state of the family does not correspond to this value, we still want the family to live up to this value. We want the family to be the nucleus of society. And this is deeply reassuring because through it, we say that we do not want the individual or individualism to be the fundamental reality in society. At the basis of every society, we want there to be a group of people called family and linked within it by deep and lasting bonds. At the heart of culture, we want an altruistic structure rather than a constant tendency toward self-interest. A man and a woman who have come together voluntarily, willing to give their best throughout their lives and to make sacrifices to bring children into the world and to care for them. In the words of St. John Paul II, within the people of life and the people for life, the family has a decisive responsibility. This responsibility flows from its very nature as a community of life and love, founded upon marriage, and from its mission to guard, reveal, and communicate love. Here it is a matter of God's own love, of which parents are co-workers and, as it were, interpreters when they transmit life and raise it according to his fatherly plan. This is the love that becomes selflessness, receptiveness, and gift. Within the family, each member is accepted, respected, and honored precisely because he or she is a person. And if any family member is in greater need, the care which he or she receives is all the more intense and attentive. The family has a special role to play throughout the life of its members, from birth to death. It is truly the sanctuary of life, the place in which life, the gift of God, can be properly welcomed and protected against the many attacks to which it is exposed, and can develop in accordance with what constitutes authentic human growth. Consequently, the saintly Pope concludes, the role of the family in building a culture of life is decisive and irreplaceable. As long as the institution of the family lasts, whatever the shortcomings and failures of actual families, we will have an institution that is greater than a person, a structure that by its very nature tends to transcend the narrow and self-referential confines of selfishness. The family is a sign of hope that in our world, selfish concern does not have the first and last word. The family is the antidote to the world that has been deconstructed by individualism. The family, in all its social and ecclesial implications, is an experience of order in the chaos of the world and offers the locus for authentic and full development and realization for all generations, including ours. Quite simply, the family is the only institution that teaches us to grow and to live pro Deo et Patria, for God and for country. I thank you for your patience and your kind attention.